I'm so absolutely thrilled to have this opportunity to share some of my work and some of the things that motivate that work with you all this evening. To get started, I wanted to pull up this slide. Often when we start thinking about STEM and success in STEM, we often think about the pipeline as a metaphor, right? And so the National Center for Education Statistics produced this graphic a few years ago to talk about and to share STEM attrition at the undergraduate level. And so what they did was they started with projecting the high school class of 2005, those students who started fall of 2001, and about 4 million students, and started to think through, based upon some of the statistics, what's the likelihood that they would graduate with a STEM degree at the point of graduation. And so what we find is that students have a high probability of leaving out of the system at many different entry points. Only a small percentage of those students are college ready at the point of graduation, about 30%. Only about 7% actually would enter into college with the intent to major in the STEM area, and only about 4% of those would actually graduate with a STEM degree. And that might sound startling to you all, but it certainly sounds startling to me, because for me, it's a matter of cultivating the talent in our country. All right, and so when we start thinking about those students who enter into that pipeline, even as a STEM major, there is a dramatic difference in persistent outcomes of students by demographic. So white students and Asian students are more likely to complete an undergraduate degree in STEM than our Latinx, Latino students, our African American, and our Native American students. And the rates are a little startling. And so a lot of my work is about trying to figure out how to cultivate systems that support student success. Some attrition is good. If you come to college and you decide, hey, I'm interested in something completely different, and you have decided that you want to make that change, that's a good decision, and we are excited for you, and we're going to celebrate your change. But if there are other things that you are interested in doing, we'd like to figure out how to best support you in doing so. The fact that we have these differences in graduation rates end up culminating in differences in the actual science and engineering workforce. And so this is some data from the National Science Foundation comparing the US population to the incidence of population of individuals by demographic in the S&E professions. And we see that white men and white women, as well as Asian men and Asian women, are well represented in the science and engineering workforce. However, our African American and Latino men and women are both underrepresented when you make a comparison of their population to their actual presence in the workforce. All right, so taking that into consideration, one of the questions that I wanted to pose to you all to think about is this an important thing, right? So we have this underrepresentation. This happens, it's a phenomenon that happens. But is diversity important to STEM? And if it is, why is it important to STEM? Why is it important that we would have great representation within our professions and within our academic programs? Some people say that there's a social justice imperative, right? That it is the right thing to do, that we need to address historical imbalances and injustices such that everyone has an opportunity to study in the degree area, and that's great. There's also a stewardship imperative, and when we think about the stewardship imperative, we think about the human resources that we have in our country, the human resources that produces the innovations of tomorrow. And if we're not cultivating our talent, then we're putting ourselves at a disadvantage. And so there's a stewardship imperative. And then there's the innovation imperative in and of itself. So there's a whole body of research about teams and the way that teams function and collaboration and the ability to solve problems. And what some of the research has found is that scientific progress is based upon those teams being able to collaborate to come up with new solutions. If you think about it, how we ask questions drives the science that we push forward. And when folks have different perspectives, they ask different questions. And if they're asking different questions, then we have more robust products that start to be produced. And so the ways in which we seek answers to those questions also starts to be influenced by our value system and the things that we think are important. And so having that diversity piece starts to be really important in thinking through the kinds of questions that get asked, as well as the ways in which we start to seek to answer those questions. So let's look at a couple of challenging spaces where this has been important in terms of industry. I promise y'all, I'm gonna get this thing together at some point. Okay, next. Thank you very much. All right, so here's a case that I'd like you all to think about. And this is fetal mortality rates. Within motor vehicle crashes, one of the leading causes of the death of fetuses due to maternal trauma comes from this. And the way that this starts to end up being a challenge when you start thinking about diversity and all of those good things is the initial models, the ways in which seatbelts were crafted, were using male models, normal-sized men. That's great for a subset of the population. However, that is not great for the totality of the population. And so in crafting seatbelts using only male models, it wasn't responsive to the needs of pregnant mothers. And so a small crash, 35 miles per hour, you wouldn't necessarily think that that kind of crash could cause this kind of damage to a life. And the lives are important. And so being able to ask the right questions about what is it that we need to have in terms of the design of our seatbelts? What is it that we need to have in terms of design of their responses? How do we model what's happening there? All of that comes about from having the right people asking the right questions and seeking out good solutions therein. And so in challenging the norms of the male body being used as the model for the seatbelt development, and developing pregnant crash dummies and using computer simulations, we start to have a better product that saves lives. Next. We're just gonna do next now. Other cases where this has become very important is with heart valves. Some of the earliest heart valves were sized to male hearts. The voice recognition systems. You know, we love our cell phone being able to say things into it and it provide us information, right? The hands-free is a wonderful option. But some of the earlier voice recognition systems were calibrated to male voices, leaving women's voices largely unheard, and different dialects and different accents. One of the things that I found to be quite interesting is that some of the web-based algorithms for even presenting job opportunities to individuals are biased towards women and thinking that if there's a woman candidate here, then they're probably interested in these positions. And so you start thinking about machine learning and other kinds of algorithms that get developed and how they're responsive to some of the biases and how that impacts the job searches and other kinds of things that individuals are pursuing. Next slide. And so I posit, and I hope you'll agree, that diversity is very important to science and the work that we do. But it's more than a number. Often when we start talking about diversity, the first thing people ask are, what are your numbers? What's your representation? And the representation is important. But as important as that representation is, what are those lived experiences of the individuals in the system? If you have a person from a diverse background or from different perspectives in a room and they can't ask the questions because the environment is not conducive to them asking the questions, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the wonderful outcomes from having that representation there. In addition to all of that, I wanted to share with you all to help make that impactful and help you to see it. I wanted to share with you all this next scenario. Next slide. So, how many right-handed people do we have in the room? Raise your hand. Excellent, excellent, excellent. If you are left-handed, can you please stand up? Awesome, awesome. I see some left-handed people. Thank you. All right, so how many of you all who are right-handed think about the lives of your left-handed friends? One or two. That is awesome. I congratulate you. I commend you. I am a right-handed person. It is very rarely that I think about the lives of my left-handed friends. I don't think about it. And when I walk into a room, I'm privileged not to have to think about it. I can sit down at a table, I can write my notes in a meeting, I can do all kinds of things and never have to think about what my left-handed friends have to do. I started thinking about this when I started thinking about students in a classroom. Imagine coming into a classroom, you're really excited, you're about to learn some new stuff. If you're left-handed, you're kind of segregated to only a certain number of seats in that room, right? Because you need a left-handed desk. If you're not segregated to those left-handed seats, then you're going to sit in another seat and you're going to be learning, but you're going to have to make adjustments to everything that you're doing the whole time that you're in class to make adjustments for the way in which you need to write if you're using your dominant hand. And I started thinking about how on any given day, a person who's left-handed is making adjustments all day long to operate in our right-handed world. And for those of us who are right-handed, we are privileged not to have to think about it unless we love someone very dearly and we're making and helping them out every day, right? And so that's privilege. Being able to show up and being able to operate without having to think about anything. There are moments when I walk in the room and I am privileged. I have a PhD in chemistry. I'm an academic. I'm a right-handed person. But there are also moments when I show up in a room where I am not privileged. And the environment when I'm not privileged may or may not be conducive to me operating at my best level. It may or may not be optimal conditions for me. And so when we start to think about diversity and we start thinking about creating welcoming environments, thinking about how we support those folks who may be in suboptimal conditions and putting them in a place where they can do their very best work, I believe is very important. Next slide. So then, this is a graphic that I have not created, but I've used and seen a couple different times. And it helps us to start to think about the differences between equality and equity. All right, and so let's kind of talk through what the picture shows. On the left side, we have 3 individuals, and we have 3 individuals on the right side too. And we see that all of the individuals are trying to watch the game. There's a game. I think it's a soccer game because I see the ball on the ground and I see the folks kicking, so I think it's a soccer game. There's a tall individual, there's a short individual, and there's an individual in a wheelchair. And each one of them has been given a box. The tall individual can see over the fence very, very well. The short individual can see over the fence just a little bit. And the individual in the wheelchair is looking at the box and missing the game. And that's an argument for equality and what it means to provide supports for individuals in an equal way. Equity says, wait, the tall person doesn't really need a box, so we're not going to give them a box. The short person needs a box, and 1 box works, but 2 boxes would work even better. So we're going to give that person 2 boxes. And the third person, you know what? We just need to build them a ramp. If we build them a ramp, they can enjoy the game as well as everybody else. And so thinking through, even as we're developing systems of support, how to be responsive to the individual needs or even group needs of our students and our folks who are on our teams becomes very important to be able to get optimal results for their participation. All right, next slide. And so that brings us to this whole notion of science for all, and what exactly does that mean? And how do we cultivate all of that? Because as I mentioned when I was talking about left-handedness and right-handedness, sometimes we don't know what we don't know. I don't know what it means to help support a left-handed person every day because I haven't spent time thinking through what that means, right? However, if I go through some professional development, if I'm very conscious of the needs of the left-handed individuals, if I spend some time being intentional about building a system that supports our left-handed individuals in an equitable manner, then that puts me in a different position to help make sure that my science is free for all. And so when we start thinking about advancing science for all, thinking through our professional development opportunities for individuals in our system, thinking through our practice, because I can be conscious of left-handed individuals right now, today, but when I leave the room, I might get real busy with other stuff, and I might start thinking about other priorities, and I might forget to be conscious of what my left-handed friends are experiencing. And so that reflective practice, making it intentional to think about how am I handling this on an ongoing basis. Developing equity-based supports to cultivate and support STEM talent, and having a true commitment to inclusivity, I think are all very important things. Reflective practice becomes really important because when we're in these decision-making states, we're in these high-stakes kind of situations, we often rely on familiarity as well as our comfort levels to make decisions. And it's easy to make decisions without being very broad in our thinking and being responsive even to some of what our priorities are, because we're making quick decisions. Next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you all in this venue is some of the ways in which we in the College of Science at LSU have been trying to address some of this and foster stronger community supports and building professional development and other kinds of activities amongst our faculty and our staff and our students. And one of the things that we've done is to develop an inclusive excellence speaker series. We are very excited to bring in Dr. Jerry Richmond as our inaugural speaker. She is phenomenal, having served on the National Science Board, having served as the president of AAAS, being in the National Academies of Science and a host of other kinds of positions, and a kick-butt scientist to boot. And so having her come in as our inaugural speaker was really, really important because we wanted to set the stage for this speaker series and bringing in people who are at the top of their craft, who are phenomenal scientists, who are doing great, great work, but who could also speak to issues of diversity and inclusion, the importance thereof, and help us to engage in a dialogue of what those things mean. And so the selection criteria for those researchers is the quality of their research at the frontiers of science and mathematics, them having a distinguished reputation, leadership in broadening the participation of underrepresented groups, any of the broader impacts work that they've done, and balance in some of those content areas. Beyond that, we've also engaged in a host of other kinds of professional development activities for our staff and our faculty members and our students. Next. So NCBI, a nice shout out from some of our friends in the audience. NCBI stands for the National Coalition Building Institute, and they offer a series of workshops on campus called Welcoming Diversity, and it helps us engage in a deep dive into exploring our own identities, the identities of our peers, stereotypes, how we internalize impression, how do we respond when we hear negative statements, how do you navigate that and do so in a way that's welcoming and not accusatory and not trying to break someone down. How do we build bridges as we're trying to have difficult conversations? NCBI does a great job of helping with that, and so we've had a couple of workshops within our college to foster that. Next. We've done safe space training, and the Office of Diversity has safe space training that they will do that's globally for the campus, but we've also scheduled some of that for our college, so to give our thought leaders an opportunity to engage in that discussion and receive that training at one time, and that's been useful. Next. There's the Chat and Chew series that the Office of Diversity also leads, and it's a monthly discussion the fourth Tuesday of each month at noontime in the LSU Student Union with different kinds of topics related to these things. Next. We brought in speakers specifically for graduate students. So Dr. Maisha Gray-Diggs was at Microsoft and was a senior talent acquisition manager. And she came in to talk with students about how to pursue industry job search. She talked about how to manage their personal identity exposure and performance so that they can be better prepared to access opportunities and build their personal network. And she also had a section for our African American students on being Black in corporate culture and what that means. And so a really robust set of discussions to help with their professional development. Next. And then we've had the American Chemical Society come in and do a career pathways to help students kind of demystify the process. These kinds of things become very important because everyone doesn't have access to the same kind of mentoring. Everyone doesn't necessarily have access to the same kinds of information pathways. And formalizing the professional development gives us an opportunity to level the playing field and increase information flow to students from diverse backgrounds. Next. All right. And so then we've also engaged in quite a bit of outreach. We were able to get an external grant from Halliburton, the Education Foundation this year, and we launched a huge science outreach initiative, Go Science for Girls, within the College of Science. And one of the things that we know from the literature is that achievement gaps can start as early as the third grade. And so our activities were based at different age groups to foster connectivity between LSU faculty members, staff, and local leaders with K-12 students so that they can see themselves, have an opportunity to experience science, and do so in a group of peers who are interested in the same kinds of things. Next. All right. So then we use some of that Halliburton support also to develop SciLead, and that's our Student Champions for Inclusion. It's a student leadership group. Those students are participating in a leadership learning laboratory where they receive professional development over about a 12 meeting period cycle, and then they actually operationalize that through collaborative effort, co-leading some of the outreach activities, as well as developing workshops for their peers. And some of the slides that you see up, the pictures you see up are them and some of the outreach activities, them participating in their own professional development, and then them leading professional development for a group of other students. And so this seeks to build community, demystify career pathways and options while they're developing skills in collaboration and communication. Next slide. We launched Sci 1001, a freshman seminar. It was called LSU 1001 in the fall, but we've gotten it approved, and now it's Sci 1001. And we're really excited about it because it helps to level the playing field for that transition to college. What we know is that those rates of attrition in terms of the graduation rates starts very early within the first couple of years. And so if we can help get students off to the right start, help them to get acclimated very early on to the rigors of college study, build community, build a sense of belonging for those students who are interested and haven't just found another major that they like better, then we're better able to support them. And so we're really excited about that as an option. And so that course focuses on the transition to college, sense of belonging, communicating effectively, and career exploration. Next. And so that's about all, folks. It's kind of a little snapshot of some of the work that we're engaged in. We do a lot of grant writing and a lot of grant support in terms of helping folks with their broader impacts and thinking through how to engage students from diverse backgrounds in the work. And there's a whole lot going on. I couldn't capture it in 20 minutes, but at least it gives you a nice little snapshot of some of the things that are going on. And I thank you for bearing with me as I tried to work with this thing behind my back. And for listening and engaging in this conversation. If you have any questions, I'd certainly be happy to take those at this time.